Okay, there you go. Sounded terrible, didn't it?
It does.
Anyway, so tonight's confession comes from Colin. First of all, a warning in case you're eating.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Good sign.
It's quite a stressful confession. It also has a sting in the tail. Father Simon and the Rectors of Retribution. My confession dates to the summer of 2021 when the country was in between lockdowns. While my wife was working from home, I as a teacher had finished for the summer, as had our daughter, Sammy. Tensions in the house were at an all-time high after months of being locked up together, the halcyon days of let's appreciate this as we'll never get a chance to spend this sort of time together again, making way for I'm going for a 7-hour walk to get away from you all. It was against this backdrop I decided to take Sammy shopping for some holiday items from the aforementioned industrial estate. We set off, me with Rover, the dog, Sammy on her bike. All was well until we got to within 100 or so yards of the Poundland store we'd set off to visit. All of a sudden I felt a tightening of my abdominal muscles and I bent over slightly. Being 40 and having felt this exact feeling several times before, I knew what it meant. A visit to the loo was in order and fast. Sammy by this stage was already at the door of the shop and I knew no amount of persuasion or bribery was going to get her to go back home. I made up my mind to quickly go into the store, buy whatever she wanted, and then make my retreat. I agreed to every suggested purchase that Sammy presented me with, shoved them in my rucksack and headed for home. However, by this point, my situation had moved from able to contain with intelligent breathing techniques to I can't hold her, Captain. Sammy raced ahead on her bike and I was left walking with caution with Rover the dog. Names have been changed. Obviously, I want to change the name of the dog.
Yeah.
Very important. Nevertheless, as I shuffled ever closer to home, I started to believe I could make it. But then disaster was to strike. As I had been moving so slowly, Sammy had raced ahead and out of sight. When I got to the T-junction at the end of the road where we'd had to make a left and cross, she'd made a right and I could see her cycling away into the distance. I cried after her, but she simply moved further and further away. At this point, my survival instincts kicked in and I remember thinking, at times like this, what would Baden-Powell do? And I noticed a row of bushes along the back of some houses, and I formulated a plan. I quickly tied Rover up to the nearest lamppost and burrowed my way to the back of the bushes. Time passed.
Yes, it did, didn't it?
I was finally free. Sammy, by this point, had U-turned and was repeatedly cycling past my hidden position, shouting out for me. Despite being 5 at the time, her voice was like a cross between Fred Elliott and Foghorn Leghorn. And I was panicking she'd bring unwanted attention to an already tense situation. You see, my plan was to wait for a minute, sneak out, untie Rover, collect Sammy and head for home. However, this is where my problems really began. An elderly couple out for a walk started to approach Rover, tickling her chin and looking around the place, presumably for her owner, meaning I couldn't sneak out from my position incognito. To make matters worse, Sammy then cycled up to them, and I could see a conversation taking place involving hand gestures and lots of pointing. The elderly man began examining Rover's collar and then took out his mobile phone. I could see him dialing it. And then talking to someone. Although I was in denial, I knew exactly who he was talking to. Within a few minutes, my wife appeared, looking around bewildered. By this stage, revealing my location was simply not an option, so I allowed her, Sammy and Rover to scour the surrounding area for quite a good while until they disappeared from view. Once I was confident nobody was around, I left my position. Time was but a mere concept now, and I had no idea how long I'd been sitting in amongst the bushes. I headed for home, conscious of the numerous missed calls I had from my wife, family and friends. As I got closer to home, however, I found a sense of freedom, that maybe I could own this. I'd spent too many days making excuses for myself or shifting the blame to others. God had sent me a moment to embrace and become the man I was destined to become, and I was going to seize it. I knocked on my front door, and as my wife answered with her, "Where the heck have you been?" face on, I took a deep breath, closed and then opened my eyes and said, "I've just fainted." At first she was sceptical, but the detailed story of how I must have fainted into a pile of bushes began to win her sympathies. Wait for it. Father Simon and the Rectors of Retribution, I asked forgiveness not from my daughter, who had a great time out on her bike, not from the elderly couple who probably still dine out to this very day on the story of finding an abandoned 5-year-old and her dog. No, I ask it from my wife, who not only gave me a giant hug and an apology for being cross with me, but waited on me hand and foot for the next 3 days, not letting me leave my bed or even change the channel on the television upstairs. She did leave me about 6 months later, but I'm sure it had nothing to do with this incident at all. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me. Oh, well, that's very nice. Very good. That's from...
So she's gone.
So that's what I meant by a sting on the tail. Sting in the tail, because it was all going fine and then all of a sudden not. I don't think that was too gruesome, but it was very, very stressful. Sister Holly.
I felt stressed even just listening to it. Maybe she left you, Colin, because you were lying so much, because the whole fainting thing was really poor, the fact you lied about that.
By that.
Yeah, but lying to your partner, it's just never good. It's never a good thing to do. And then she was really caring for you. Did you not feel bad over those 3 days that you just lied? Also, why couldn't you have just... I think you should have just taken Sammy home and gone to the loo there, or found a public loo. Really, that's what you should have done in this story.
I don't think there was one.
Are you telling me that there was no loo near Poundland? None, not one. I find that surprising. And so for all of these reasons, and also the fact that it's really gross going in the middle of some bushes, that is why I am not forgiving Colin.
That's in Surrey.
Don't do that.
I mean, it's obviously really gross. Unfortunately, we all do it. So maybe not always in bushes. So I mean, I'm going to forgive. I mean, imagine if the phone number on the dog collar had been his mobile
That's
phone.
what I was thinking.
Oh my goodness me, that would have been superb. But it was very, very funny all the same. Just for the Fred Elliott reference, I'm going to forgive. Yes, hilarious. And his wife's left him since then. Good. I mean, we've got to forgive him just because of all the horrible things that have happened to Colin. So yes, forgive him.
People's verdict, please. Do you forgive Colin? Yes or no? 61054 on the text. First word is silent. Particularly as people have already dispensed their verdict on tonight's confession, which came from Colin. He needed a loo fast. He had a dog, 5-year-old, and then his wife left him. I've kind of missed some of it because, you can mention it once, but not twice. Anyway, the people's verdict, here it comes.
So Lynn in Shropshire says, not forgiven. Sounds like the ex-wife dodged a bullet. Going to the toilet in public, that's so risky.
Well, what was he supposed to do?
What if someone had seen? How awful. I agree with Holly. Stephen and Nicola in West Sussex, though, say, totally forgive this. We've all been there. All public toilets are closed nowadays, especially when it was COVID. Also, who cooked the food that gave him an upset stomach?
Know.
Was it the ex? Well, really, if you ask me. And finally, Caroline in Clacton-on-Sea says, forgiven. Once I had to dash into some bushes. My feet slipped and I fell into a lot of nettles. Definitely a sting in the tail for me.
Yes, dashing into bushes is probably a whole new area of confession. I don't even know if we want them to. Anyway, let's find out. Confessions at greatesthitsradio.co.uk. After yesterday's warnings that had to be given for the confession, I'm pleased to say that today contains absolutely none of them.
Good.
Phew.
And no hiding behind bushes or anything like that.
No.
Due to stomach cramps. Anyway, if you missed it, it'll be on the Confessions podcast, released on Friday. A lovely thing. Today's smart speaker goes to Stan. Thanks, Stan. Father Simon and the endlessly forgiving and gracious collective. This story takes place in November 1999. I had left the safe sanctuary of my home county of Cornwall and decided to join the RAF. I think I could have definitely been described as naive at the time. Cornwall, says Stan, doesn't function like the rest of the country, so I was leaving my very safe life and heading toward basic training at what I should call RAF trousers. That's the name of the camp where he's gone.
Okay. Right.
It's not actually that we've changed the name of the camp, because it would be a little bit weird if it was called RAF trousers. Basic training was essentially 8 weeks of being shouted at for everything. Nothing was good enough. Everything required raised voices, and everything required polishing. About halfway through basic training, we're all shipped off to be shouted at, even louder, by RAF Regiment. I'm going to do this piece to camera too. RAF Regiment, a specialist corps, specialising in soldiering tasks related to air power, like evacuations, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Back to main camera. I think a lot of the punishments dished out by the regiment were for their own amusement. Like the time they had me frog hopping around the parade ground on a particularly cold day, shouting at the top of my voice, "I'm feeling warmer now! I'm feeling warmer now!"
Okay.
Very funny if you're in RAF regiment. My 24-year-old confession comes from the particular day when we were shown how to use camouflage paint. I should say at this point, although I was indeed naive, I was also annoyingly confident. If I was the centre of attention and everyone was laughing, then it was mission accomplished. I'd do anything for a laugh, literally anything. Such an opportunity presented itself on Camo Paint Day, as it was referred to. Camouflage paint, camo paint, is a very thick, oily sort of face paint. It doesn't feel particularly pleasant, but that mattered not. I'd quickly made myself into something resembling a cross between Arnold Schwarzenegger and a shrub. I was incredibly proud of my effort. I was almost invisible, a shadow, almost a myth, in fact. There were a few others who hadn't been quite so skilled as myself. There was one lad in particular who had really struggled. He'd mainly used the lighter-coloured paint and looked as though he'd just come back from 2 weeks in the Bahamas. I saw an opportunity. I approached him out of the shadows, suddenly appearing like a ninja. He didn't spot me at first. He thought I was just a shrub, blowing in the wind next to him.
Yep.
When he realised I was actually a person, I offered to help. "Do you want a hand?" I said. He jumped a little.
Of course.
"I think you've used a little too much of the light colour," I said, very sincere. "Yes, please, if you could help me, that would be great, thank you." I deployed some of the darker colour. Not much, just a bit. Telling him he looked great, I disappeared into the shadows, never to be seen again. The regiment sergeant then came over for a quick inspection. I was amazed he could see any of us. Of course, we were critiqued with a certain amount of aggression. However, his anger suddenly peaked when he reached the airman who resembled, well, I can only describe him as a tanned Adolf Hitler at the end of the line.
Oh, no.
He'd only used a very little amount.
Yeah.
I feel I saw a want to smile and laugh briefly across the sergeant's face. However, the rage quickly took over. The said rage was initially aimed at the young airman before it was explained that it was someone else who had done the paint. Stepping back with authority, he glared up and down the line. "Who was it then?" This is the man
Windsor
from...
Davis.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shut up. Point them out and they'll be reflighted quicker than they can run. Now, being reflighted was our worst nightmare. It meant we got put back a week and had to retake that part of the course all over again. Another week of shouting, another week of polishing. My heart sank, realising that I'd gone too far this time. However, when the young lad came to identify the perpetrator, he was faced with a group of people who all looked exactly the same. He had absolutely no idea who had committed the camouflage indiscretion. He thought it was someone who looked a bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger and a shrub.
Yeah.
We were all punished with multiple press-ups, sit-ups and sprints around the hangar, carrying all of our gear. Thankfully, when trying to identify me, the tears of laughter running down my face weren't noticed. The camouflage paint is, it appears, water resistant. So I seek forgiveness from my colleagues who were punished for my need to get a laugh, and from the young airman who I briefly turned into a ruthless dictator. I like to think the sergeant had a good laugh when out of sight of the recruits, but we'll never know, says Stan. Now, normally I'd be thinking, well, someone who demands to be the centre of attention can be incredibly annoying, as I suspect Stan might well be. However, he did well with the camouflage paint, but did he do well enough with Sister Holly? Let's find out.
Yeah, I mean, the whole class clown thing is really quite irritating. Also, these RAF guys, they do not mess around and they don't take a joke well. He already knew this. And so for him to do that, he knew this was going to end badly. And then for the whole group then to have to do all these press-ups and sit-ups and sprinting and running around, all because you thought you'd do some funny little joke. It was never going to go down well. And I feel sorry for the poor guy. And so for all of those reasons, I'm not forgiving at all.
I suspect Matt might feel differently.
Yes, I'm going to say forgiven on 2 points.
Yes.
And the first point is this. It was a perfect crime, wasn't it? When do you ever get the opportunity to commit the perfect crime where you can be disguised as a shrub and totally camouflaged? No one knows it's you because you look like all the other shrubs, and gives them a Hitler moustache, and it's all fine. The other reason is because they threatened collective punishment, and we've seen once again that collective punishment doesn't work. They said, oh, we're going to put you back a week, you're going to have to do the whole thing again. And then when he couldn't identify the other guy, he said, all right, forget that idea, you're just going to do a few laps around the yard. It was never going to happen, and for that reason, I'm going to forgive collective punishment once again falls on its face.
I think we've another little insight into stuff that's happened in Matt's past. People's verdict, please, on Stan's confession. Do you forgive? 61054. First word is Simon. Just a moment. Before we continue, we had a confession before 6 o'clock from Stan. A story of joining the RAF, then being trained by the RAF regiment, camouflage paint, and a fake Adolf Hitler. The people's verdict is in. Here we go.
Yes, forgiveness basically depends on whether you were in the armed forces or not. Yes. Stuart says, forgiven. As someone who served for 33 years in the RAF, the sergeant would have had a great laugh when out of sight of the recruits. All character building stuff. Phil Beckinsale from Somerset, though, says, definitely forgiven. Having spent 13 years as a medic in the RAF, having a laugh, especially with the RAF regiment, is always fair game. At least he didn't look like a panda, like one of my fellow recruits ended up. But Sam says, no forgiveness here. I feel sorry for the poor chap who had the Hitler moustache drawn on him. Class clowns are so tiresome.
That's true, but class clown confessions might be fun.
Oh, yeah.
Send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a production thing to say.
Not at all.
Just hang on and wait. Anyway, don't forget the Confessions podcast is there. It's brand new and fresh on Friday. If you haven't got the latest, tell your friends, subscribe, give it 5 stars, send us money. Anyway, that last bit was made
Don't do
up.
that.
Today's confession comes from Mr. Mackay. I have given Holly a little lecture in Delights of Porridge.
Yeah.
1970s sitcom style. Anyway, so it comes from Mr. Mackay. Dear all, I would like to be referred to as Mr. Mackay during this confession. Those who know. Mm-hmm. Father Simon, Brother Matt and Holly, no point in schmoozing here. I already know which way this vote is going.
Really?
Yeah.
The story starts in 1988 with a district line tube journey back home from my job in the post office. I noticed above the seats opposite me an advert for what would eventually become my new career. Join the prison service, it said. Now, the thought of carrying a big stick and telling Mr. Big to get back in his cell or else was quite appealing. So off with my application it was. I'm not sure you got the gist of it.
A little bit more to it than that.
18 months later, and out of the blue, I received my acceptance letter with joining instructions at HMP Slade. Again, porridge.
Yeah.
I arrived on day 1, already with my fellow recruits, eager to get stuck in. Short hair, shiny boots. Now, the reality was somewhat different to the image of how this was going to go. No one prepared me for the morning slop out, which is exactly what it sounds and exactly what it smells like. Oh, yeah, I should have said.
If you're having your tea.
If you're having your tea. It's another one of those, but not for long.
Okay.
Life went by and I got to grips with the job, and when the offer of a move to a brand new state-of-the-art, no one will escape from here establishment with integral sanitation, I'm in. Where do I sign up? So I moved the family to a sleepy backwater, and I started in the brave new world. Slightly naive in the fact that I was now surrounded by murderers, terrorists, armed robbers, and other undesirables. Now they have a confession or two. However, the lack of smells was a small price to pay in return for the slim chance that I disappeared on my way home one day, never to be seen again.
Right.
It's like a fatalistic way of approaching your job, Mr. Mackay. Several years went by with lots of exciting times when I was transferred to work within the prison's control room, a highly specialised and technical post full of grown-up responsibility. However, to pass the time, we may or may not have taken part in, let's call it, catching 20 winks, normally in the boss's office, until he got wind of this and tore us off a strip. He then took to locking his office when he went home. I shall refer to this man as Napoleon. Very Captain Mannering, so we're crossing our 70s sitcoms here. Not deterred by this, we cunningly found a way in. It's a bit like The Great Escape, but in reverse. We realised that we could remove the floor tiles from our room, and the panels would come up, allowing us to essentially enter his office in the void undetected, which of course we did. Not to sleep, but to play a few mind games, moving the odd thing around on his desk, rearranging the furniture, all harmless japes. Until the day it clicked with Napoleon that we had something to do with this, as it only seemed to occur when we were on shift. An oversight on our part. He could not work out how we were doing it, however. But he knew, and rather than have a small and quiet word with us, congratulating us on our ingenuity, he decided to shout very loudly at our boss, who I'm going to call Mr. Barraclough. Again, porridge.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Barraclough was a bit of a wimp. Jolly nice chap, but not someone you would follow over the top to engage the enemy with. The following night, Mr. Barraclough decided that he had to stamp his authority and tell us off, which, of course, we all took on the chin, admitting nothing. However, Mr. Barraclough liked to have a shower at work, normally just before the shift changeover, and to show our displeasure at how he might have taken Napoleon's side, we entered the shower room and emptied his shower gel out and topped the bottle up with cooking oil. Oh, how he laughed when lathering up. Even louder when he came out of the cubicle to mumble loudly at us and discover that his uniform and towel had all disappeared. We were, after all, in a prison full of rogues, bounders and vagabonds. Up came the floor tiles, under we went, with the confiscated clothing nicely arranged in Napoleon's office. The plan being that Mr. Barraclough would come out, hiding his modesty behind the hand towel that we left him, and then see his uniform in the office. Once he applauded our genius, we would have then retrieved them for him and all would be well. The one anomaly we did not factor into this plan was that Napoleon came into work much earlier than expected. But as he approached his office, he was met with a scantily clad senior officer, and the sight of his clothing in his office behind a locked door, to which only he had the key, was all very Jonathan Creek. Another TV reference. We're hitting all of them today. It's like TV show bingo. As luck would have it, our day shift replacements had started to arrive and we all scuttled off as quickly as possible, leaving Napoleon and Mr. Barraclough staring into each other's eyes. Collective, I do not seek redemption from Napoleon. He deserved everything that he got. But on behalf of Team Ruffians, I would like to extend our apologies to Mr. Barraclough. Again, not so much for the jinx, but for abandoning him when he was at his most vulnerable, basically naked, and within the stare and grasp of Napoleon, who looked like he was about to explode. We never did find out how that conversation went, and it was never spoken of again. Right, back in your cells. Yours, Mr. Mackay. How nice to remember Fulton Mackay on this fine feature. Thank you, Mr. Mackay. I don't think we've had a prison officer's confession, not for a long time. Anyway, Sister Holly, I think you got most of the porridge references because I explained.
Yes, thank you for doing that. I mean, the thing is, you should have really been working, really, in all of this. You were sat in the control room and then you were just running around. These prisoners could have been doing anything and you just weren't watching them, which is not very good. Also, Mr. Barraclough, I feel very, very sorry for him. I don't like pranks, as we know, and the cooking oil thing in the shower gel.
I don't like that.
Nasty, not very fun. And also, taking his clothes, that's not very fun. That's not fun for Mr. Barraclough. You might have thought it was funny, but it's not funny for him, nor is it funny for Napoleon.
Also, Mr. Barraclough is a nice person.
Exactly.
That's the problem. He's just because he's not going on with all of your jolly japes. He doesn't deserve to. You don't want cooking. I mean, it's not.
It's not very nice.
I mean, Matt doesn't like pranks, but he's going to find some way of letting Mr. Mackay off.
I mean, obviously, Mr. Barraclough, very nice man, but who has a shower at work? I've never understood that. It doesn't make any sense. Why? I mean, getting naked at work, never a good idea. And being in a shower, absolutely never, ever
There's
do
a shower
that.
at the end of this corridor.
Really?
Yes.
No one will ever use... my guarantee, money on the table, no one ever uses that shower. Because it's a very weird thing to be doing that at work. So
what if you cycle into work and you're all sweaty?
Cycle, I mean, imagine that. No chance. And also, I'm going to forgive for the porridge references. Because wasn't that great? Ronnie Barker. So, yes, definitely forgiven.
Do you forgive Mr. Mackay? Yes or no, please, on the People's Verdict. 61054, first word is Simon. Just before the news, we had a confession. Such larks at HMP Slade. Basically, Mr. Mackay stole Mr. Barraclough's clothes and stowed them in Napoleon's office. You had to be there. The People's Verdict, here it is.
So Tim in London says, stretching and twisting my head in a Mr. Mackay kind of way, forgiven. They obviously needed to ease the boredom at work, something I'm sure many of us need to do. And I very much admire their ingenuity in sneaking into the locked office. Very funny indeed. Sam says, forgiven. Having worked in the prison service for 30 years and still doing so, you need a good sense of humour and banter to relieve the stress. Yes. And Matt in Norwich says, yes, forgiven. I work in the prison service and I love a joke occasionally there. I also shower there regularly.
There you go.
Yes,
maybe you will understand if you worked in the prison service.
Yes, maybe I would.
If you work in the prison service and you have a confession for us, it can be as anonymous as you like. Send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Okay. All right, never mind.
But it'll be there tomorrow.
Yes.
What?
Oh, no. There it is again. It's all going so well.
The confessions music lets you know that the confession is here, and they'll all be edited together. They'll be put together in a fabulous podcast tomorrow. You can download all the excitement. This is the last one of the week, though, and it comes from Chloe. And I think we're going to have to give this a PG or a 12 certificate just for the sheer amount of alcohol that is consumed in a relatively short space of time. That's what I'm saying. Simon and the Forgiving Fellows, says Chloe. First of all, thank goodness you're back. I have a small baby and spend my nights giving bottles to an infant whilst chortling away to your podcast. I thought I'd write in with my own confession, as it really does take me back to my more footloose days as a single lady. About a decade ago, I went to Bruges with an old French friend who I met at a Catholic camp. I have since relapsed, as you're about to find out, but the friendship has continued. She and I had a great time tasting all the beers. And obviously anyone who knows Belgian beers knows that if you tasted all the beers, that's a lot of alcohol that you're taking. And I managed to convince an old travelling friend, let's call him Steve, to come visit on the Saturday from his home in Brussels. Now, I might have rather fancied Steve when we were travelling, and whilst he was definitely not boyfriend material, he was quite dashing and charming on meeting up again. That's interesting, between someone who's dashing and charming but definitely not boyfriend material. Anyway, a day and evening of drinking and laughing ensued, and we all spoke French, as I'm half French and fluent. My French Catholic friend seemed to get on well with Steve as well, and we convinced him to stay past his last train back to Brussels, despite the lack of accommodation. We said us girls could head to toe in a bunk in our hostel, and he could have the other bunk. So we stumbled in fairly inebriated fashion into our dorm, and all the girls in the other bunk seemed very annoyed that we'd brought someone back. We were making quite a wee racket. So they started to threaten to go and tell the reception people and get us all kicked out for sneaking someone in, which is obviously against the rules. Steve was in the bunk above us and was too drunk to obey orders, which is almost a Dead Kennedys song, but not. He would... Second reference to the Dead Kennedys in half an hour. He would keep leaning over and saying he needed company as he was going to rush off to get the first train. So we had to have one girl up there in order for it not to look like we had someone there in the morning. I needed no excuse, so I said, all right, I'll go. He was clearly just wanting a cheeky snog. So up I went, and sure enough, we had a little cheeky snog. And he kept whispering just how much he liked me. I was keen to shut him up, so tried to pretend to fall asleep in order for us not to be kicked out by the dorm mates. He continued and said he'd really, really fancied me, hadn't it been obvious? And I said, frankly, no, I didn't get that vibe from you at all when we were travelling. He suddenly went silent and said, Chloe? I said, yes? There was a long silence. He said, well, my version is, oh, bother. At this point I realised he thought he was snogging my friend.
Oh, no! Oh, dear.
Oh, no.
Oh, right. Okay.
I immediately got angry / embarrassed and kicked him out of bed. He apologised profusely as he was sent to the train station several hours early for the first train. He couldn't tell the difference. I don't ask forgiveness from Steve, who was clearly an outrageous flirt who can't tell the difference between me and my friend. I do seek forgiveness from my friend Isabel. She's named at the end. Who I couldn't face telling the truth. In the morning, I told her he'd wanted to leave early for his train because he couldn't sleep, which was partly true. So please forgive me for not coming clean and telling the full embarrassing tale. Also for assuming he was after me and denying her the opportunity to turn him down herself or marry him and have babies, as is the Catholic way.
Yes.
Thank you and hurrah and return.
Right.
Hurrah.
I mean, that went down an avenue.
Yes, it did. As indeed did their evening. Well, when you think about it. But that's Belgian beer for you. And if you have too much Belgian beer, those kind of shenanigans will take place. Let that be a warning to you, Sister Holly.
Yes, I mean, really, when you invited him back to your room at the hostel, I feel like there might have been some ulterior motives there.
Yes.
Which I'm just less than impressed with, really. Also, the lots and lots of drinking, never a good idea, is it really? And so for those reasons, really, I just think it was a little bit gross, all the snogging. Just no, bit much. So not forgiving.
How strong is this beer? 13%. Okay,
Yeah.
I'll have another one.
Yeah.
Another litre, please.
Yes, maybe not. I mean, I was in Bruges last summer, and I can attest to the strength of those Belgian beers. I had 2 and was ready to go home. Although you do have chip vans in Bruges, which
Were
is
you
even
invited
better.
to a bunk?
No, I
cheeky
wasn't.
snog?
There's absolutely no bunking. So I'm going to forgive. I mean, everyone really made poor life choices here, didn't they? I mean, going back to and being in the bunk, and Chloe getting confused with Isabel, and all of that. Steve really doesn't sound like boyfriend material to me, and he ended up getting his train, didn't he? So it all worked out well for everyone. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
Okay, so the people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Chloe for this terrible sin involving Belgian beer and cheeky snogs? It's entirely down to you. 61054. First word has to be Simon. The people's verdict is expected any moment now. Sent him packing.
Yes.
She wouldn't put up with any nonsense. Here's the people's verdict. What do they say?
Not forgiven, says Tom. Why did she bring Steve back to the youth hostel in the first place? All the drinking and snogging, a disaster waiting to happen.
Yes.
Tommy, forgiven. Ultimately, the main victim in all this was poor Chloe. Of course she didn't tell her, Isabel. Why would she embarrass herself even more? But Elise in Walton on the Hill says not forgiven, only because snogging is a no-no word. I agree with Holly. Too gross.
Why is snogging a no-no?
I've no idea. I'll have to ask Elise.
Okay. Anyway, Elise, get in touch. Let
Yeah.
us know what's going on there. Anyway, if you have a confession, please send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.